Some knights are remembered for their victories. Others are remembered for how they fell. Knight Artorias the Abysswalker is remembered for both. This is a story about one of the greatest warriors in the world of Dark Souls. A knight who served under Lord Gwyn himself. A man who walked into darkness that would swallow anyone else whole. But before he became a legend, before he earned the title of Abysswalker, he was simply one of 4. Lord Gwyn ruled over the Age of Fire with an iron grip. He had an army of silver knights and countless soldiers at his command. But above them all stood 4 warriors who answered directly to him. These were his most trusted champions. Ornstein the Dragon Slayer led them with his lightning spear. Hawkeye Guff could shoot down dragons from miles away with his great bow. Lord's Blade Siren was a deadly assassin who moved through shadows like water. And then there was Artorias. Artorias earned a special nickname among the 4. They called him the Wolf Knight. This was not just some random title given out of nowhere. Gwyn himself recognized something fierce and loyal in this warrior, something that reminded everyone of a wolf. To mark his status, Artorias received the wolf ring. This was a special ring with a wolf symbol carved right into it. The ring did more than just look impressive. It actually helped Artorias stay steady during combat. No matter how hard an enemy hit him, no matter how chaotic a battle became, Artorias would not stagger or stumble. His stance remained solid like stone. The wolf ring was fitting for a knight known for his unbendable will. Artorias had a determination that seemed almost impossible to break. Combined with his skill, using a greatsword, he became one of the most dangerous fighters in all of Lordran. His technique with that massive blade was unmatched. Nobody could swing a greatsword quite like he could. Artorias stood out even among the 4 knights because of how he looked on the battlefield. He wore distinctive azure armor that shone with a blue tint, unlike anything else in Gwyn's forces. A flowing tassel hung from his helmet, moving with every step he took. This tassel was a symbol of pride and glory. When people saw that blue armor coming toward them with that tassel trailing behind, they knew exactly who was approaching. Beyond his armor, Artorias carried 2 main pieces of equipment. His greatsword was massive and forged specifically for him. He also wielded a great shield to defend himself against whatever threats he faced. Both weapons were crafted to honor his status as a hero. These were not ordinary pieces of gear handed out to regular soldiers. They were made for a champion. Gwyn saw how skilled Artorias had become. He watched this knight carve through enemies and stand against threats that would make other warriors run. So Gwyn did something remarkable. He gave Artorias a fragment of his own Lord's soul. This was a piece of divine power that very few beings in the world ever received. By giving Artorias this unique soul, Gwyn was basically saying that this knight stood above almost everyone else. Artorias was now officially one of the most formidable champions in all of existence. But strength alone did not define Knight Artorias. During his many journeys across dangerous lands, he formed a bond with an enormous grey wolf named Sif. Nobody knows exactly how these 2 first met or what brought them together. What we do know is that their friendship became legendary in its own right. Sif was not just some pet following Artorias around. This wolf became a true battle companion. The 2 of them fought side by side against whatever enemies they encountered. Over time, Sif actually learned to fight using a greatsword, just like his master. The wolf would grip the blade in his jaws and swing it with surprising grace. He mirrored the techniques that Artorias used in combat. It was something nobody had ever seen before. Their connection ran deeper than just shared fighting styles. According to the lore, Sif's very soul became linked with Artorias in some mysterious way. The proof lies in what happens when you forge weapons from Sif's soul later in the game. Those weapons carry characteristics of Artorias himself. A piece of the night lived on inside his wolf companion. That is how close these two became. Among the four knights, Artorias also shared a special friendship with Kieran. She was the assassin of the group, an expert at moving unseen and striking from the shadows. The two of them served together under Gwyn and clearly developed a deep respect for each other over time. Kieran would later call Artorias a dear friend when speaking about him. The way she talks about him suggests something beyond just professional respect between fellow soldiers. When Artorias eventually met his fate, Kieran was visibly heartbroken. Her reaction to what happened to him showed just how much she cared. Some fans have even wondered if there was a romantic connection between these two knights. The game never confirms this officially, but her grief tells us everything we need to know. What made Artorias special was not just his combat abilities or his armor. It was the loyalty and affection he inspired in others. Sif would guard his grave for centuries after he was gone. Kieran would travel across dangerous lands just to pay her respects. These are not things that happen for ordinary warriors. Artorias had a character that drew others to him. He represented everything a knight was supposed to be: valor, honor, determination. But the age of peace under Lord Gwyn would not last forever. Darkness was spreading in corners of the world that nobody was watching. And soon, this wolf knight would face a threat that even his legendary skill might not be enough to overcome. The Abyss was coming. Lord Gwyn made a sacrifice that changed everything. He threw himself into the first flame to keep the Age of Fire burning. But with Gwyn gone, something terrible started growing in the shadows, and it would threaten to swallow the entire world. New Londo was a prosperous human city. The people there lived good lives under rulers they trusted. These rulers were called the Four Kings, and each one of them had received something incredible from Gwyn before he linked the flame. He had given each king a fragment of his own Lord's soul. This was supposed to be an honor, a gift that would help them lead their people wisely. But gifts can be twisted into weapons when the wrong voice starts whispering. That voice belonged to Kath. He was a primordial serpent, one of the ancient creatures that existed before the Age of Fire even began. Kath had his own plans for the world. He wanted to end the Age of Fire completely and bring about something called the Age of Dark. To make this happen, he needed powerful allies. So he slithered into New Londo and found exactly what he was looking for. The Four Kings listened to Kath. Whatever he promised them, whatever lies he told, it worked. One by one, these rulers who had sworn loyalty to Gwyn abandoned everything they once stood for. They turned their backs on the light and embraced the darkness that Kath offered. Under his guidance, they learned a forbidden technique called life drain. This allowed them to steal the humanity right out of living people. They could rip away the very essence that made someone human and consume it for themselves. The corruption did not stop with the Four Kings. Their knightly followers saw what their rulers had become and made the same choice. These knights transformed into something new, something wrong. Their eyes turned red with dark energy. They became known as Dark Wraiths, undead warriors who existed only to hunt down humans and drain their souls. Kath gave them special tools to help with this grim work. Red-eye orbs allowed the Dark Wraiths to invade other lands and track down victims wherever they hid. As the Four Kings fell deeper into darkness, something even worse happened beneath New Londo. A yawning void opened up in the depths of the city. This was the Abyss. It was pure darkness given form, a swirling emptiness that consumed everything it touched. The Four Kings had literally torn a hole in reality itself, and that hole was growing. The Dark Wraiths used this abyss to fuel their power. Every time they drained humanity from a victim, the darkness beneath New Londo expanded just a little bit more. They raided human communities across the land, bringing back stolen souls to feed into the void. What had once been a shining city was now the source of terror spreading across the world. Word reached Londo about what was happening. The gods who remained after Gwyn's departure watched in alarm as New Londo transformed into something monstrous. The dark wraiths were not just threatening humans, they were threatening all living things. The abyss did not care what it consumed. It would devour gods and mortals alike if given the chance. The remaining powers in Londo understood just how serious this was. An unchecked abyss could spread beyond New Londo and engulf entire kingdoms. It could end civilization as everyone knew it. Something had to be done, and it had to be done quickly. But Gwyn was gone. The great Lord of Sunlight, who would have led the charge against this darkness, was burning inside the first flame. His followers were on their own. The royal authorities faced an impossible choice. New Londo was already lost. The four kings, the dark wraiths, and the abyss had claimed it completely. There was no saving that city anymore. The only question was how to stop the darkness from spreading further. And the answer they came up with was horrifying. They decided to sacrifice New Londo entirely. The city had been built in a massive underground cavern system. Water from nearby sources could be directed through channels and water gates. These water gates had always been there, but nobody had ever imagined using them for something like this. The authorities gave the order. The gates were opened. Water came flooding in from every direction. It poured through tunnels and crashed through streets. The four kings, trapped in their dark domain, were drowned beneath the torrent. The dark wraiths who had terrorized so many innocent people met the same fate. But they were not the only ones caught in the flood. Countless regular citizens who had done nothing wrong were still living in New Londo. They had nowhere to run. The water took them too. In a matter of hours, New Londo transformed from a city into a watery tomb. The flood stopped the abyss from spreading any further. The darkness was contained beneath millions of gallons of water, but the cost was staggering. An entire population had been sacrificed to stop something even worse from happening. The flooded ruins of New Londo became a cursed place. The spirits of those innocent victims could not rest. They lingered as ghosts, haunting the waterlogged streets and broken buildings. An eerie darkness hung over the ruins even centuries later. This was the first time the world truly understood what the abyss could do. It took the complete destruction of a city just to halt the spread. And even then, the abyss was not destroyed. It was only contained. The threat had been stopped for now, but everyone knew that if the abyss ever emerged again, they would need a champion capable of walking into that darkness and fighting it directly. They would need someone with the will and the skill to face the void itself, and that is exactly where Artorias would prove his worth. Before the water gates opened and drowned New Londo forever, someone had to try and stop the abyss the hard way. That someone was Knight Artorias, and to do what needed to be done, he would have to make a deal that would change him forever. Artorias was sent into New Londo on behalf of the gods. The dark wraiths were spreading terror across the land, and the four kings showed no signs of stopping their corruption. Someone needed to go down into that darkness and face them directly. Given his reputation for bravery and his unmatched combat skills, Artorias was the obvious choice. He accepted the mission without hesitation. But the gods of Londo knew this would be no ordinary battle. The abyss was not just a place filled with enemies. It was a void that consumed anything living. Normal flesh would be devoured the moment it touched that darkness. So before Artorias departed, the royal court of Londo gave him something precious. They called it the Silver Pendant. This ancient treasure was engraved with the wolf emblem that had become Artorias' symbol. But the pendant was far more than decoration. It held the power to repel dark sorceries. When activated, it could deflect the twisted magic that the dark wraiths and abyssal creatures used. This was meant to be Artorias' defense against the humanity-stealing spells he would face in New Londo. With this holy talisman in hand, he had protection against the worst of what the abyss could throw at him. Still, there was another problem. The silver pendant could block dark magic, but it could not help Artorias actually enter the abyss itself. That void would still consume him the moment he stepped inside. To solve this, Artorias did something that no other knight would dare attempt. He made contact with the creatures of the abyss and forged a covenant with them. The exact details of this bargain remain unclear. We do not know what Artorias promised or what he had to sacrifice in the negotiation. What we do know is that he succeeded. Through this covenant, Artorias obtained a mystical ring that would become one of the most important artifacts in the world. The Covenant of Artorias ring symbolized his pact with the beasts of the abyss. While wearing it, he could walk through the darkness without being consumed. He could enter the void that would destroy anyone else and come out the other side unharmed. This is how Artorias earned his legendary title. He became the Abysswalker. Literally, he was a man who could walk in the abyss. No other living knight could claim this. No god had ever done it. Artorias alone possessed the ability to enter that realm of pure darkness and fight whatever lurked inside. But the covenant came at a cost. Making a deal with abyssal creatures meant accepting their curse. That curse did not affect Artorias directly at first. Instead, it seeped into his legendary greatsword. The blade that had served him faithfully in countless battles now carried the taint of the abyss within it. His sword had become cursed. Interestingly, this curse turned out to be useful in an unexpected way. The greatsword of Artorias could now harm things that normal weapons could not touch. Spectral enemies like the dark wraiths and even ghosts could be struck by his cursed blade. Where other warriors would swing uselessly at these phantoms, Artorias could cut them down. The very darkness that corrupted his sword also gave it power over creatures of darkness. Armed with his blessed pendant, his cursed sword, and the ring that let him survive the void, Artorias plunged into New Londo. He went hunting for dark wraiths in their own domain. This was their home ground, a place where they held every advantage. But Artorias did not care about the odds. The battles that followed became the stuff of legend. Artorias fought through hordes of red-eyed dark wraiths in the pitch black of the abyss. His greatsword carved through enemies that had terrorized entire communities. Legend holds that Artorias took down countless dark wraiths during this campaign. He was doing everything in his power to stem the tide of darkness spreading from New Londo. But despite all his valor, Artorias could not accomplish his ultimate goal. He could defeat the dark wraiths. He could clear out wave after wave of these twisted knights. What he could not do was destroy the four kings themselves. These rulers had become something beyond mortal. They were spectral undead beings, empowered by the abyss itself. As long as that void kept feeding them, they were effectively immortal. Artorias could not simply fight his way to victory against enemies who would not stay down. His campaign in New Londo stalled. The abyss could not be fully extinguished by one knight, no matter how skilled. This is why the decision was eventually made to flood the city. When it became clear that Artorias could not stop the four kings, the sealers opened those water gates and sacrificed everything. Artorias escaped before the waters claimed the city. The exact circumstances of his retreat are not recorded. Perhaps he was warned in time. Perhaps he sensed what was coming. What matters is that he survived. He returned to Gwyn's kingdom, carrying the weight of what had happened. He had not failed in the traditional sense, but he had not won either. New Londo was drowned, and the abyss was only contained rather than destroyed. Yet strangely, this outcome did not diminish his reputation. If anything, it grew. Artorias had done what nobody else could attempt. He had walked into the abyss and walked back out again. He had fought the dark wraiths on their own ground and lived. The covenant of Artorias' ring remained with him as proof of his impossible journey. This artifact would later become essential for anyone else who needed to face abyssal threats. The new Londo chapter forged the legend of the Abysswalker, but it also foreshadowed something darker. Artorias had touched the abyss and survived. He had made a covenant with its creatures and carried their curse in his sword. The darkness had not claimed him yet, but their connection was now permanent, and the next time Artorias faced the abyss, the outcome would be very different. Kath was not done. The primordial serpent had watched New Londo drown beneath the waves, but that setback did not slow him down. He simply found a new target. This time, his eyes fell on a peaceful kingdom called Ulasil, and the disaster that followed would make New Londo look like a warning nobody listened to. Ulasil was different from most human settlements of that era. This was a prosperous nation, known throughout the world for its mastery of sorcery. The people there had developed light-based magic that was admired and studied by scholars everywhere. They lived in relative peace during the twilight years of Gwyn's reign, perhaps even continuing after the Lord of Sunlight had linked the flame. Ulasil seemed like the last place where darkness would take root, but Kath saw opportunity where others saw safety. The serpent slithered into the shadows of this magical kingdom and began whispering to its people. We do not know exactly who he spoke to first. It may have been the king. It may have been ambitious scholars seeking forbidden knowledge. What we do know is that Kath convinced them of something dangerous. He told them that great power could be gained by delving into the abyss of humanity itself. Beneath Ulasil, buried deep in the earth, lay something that should have stayed hidden forever. A grave containing the remains of a being called Manus. This was no ordinary human. Manus was a primordial man, sometimes called the primeval man, who had existed since the earliest ages of the world. Within him rested an extraordinarily potent fragment of the dark soul itself. He had been sealed away for eons, sleeping in the depths where no one should have disturbed him. Under Kath's influence, the citizens of Ulasil committed an act of staggering foolishness. They dug down into the earth and uprooted the grave of Manus. The sorcerers of Ulasil, perhaps believing they could harness his power or learn ancient secrets, forced this primordial being back into existence. They resurrected something that the world had deliberately forgotten. The awakening of Manus was not gentle. After sleeping for countless ages, he rose in madness and agony. His mind was shattered from the forced resurrection. But what truly drove Manus over the edge was discovering that his precious pendant was gone. Someone had stolen this keepsake during the excavation of his grave. The exact nature of this pendant remains mysterious, but it clearly meant everything to Manus. Finding it missing sent him into a frenzy that would consume an entire kingdom. The humanity within Manus exploded outward in its purest dark form. This was not a controlled release of power. This was raw, primal darkness erupting from a creature who had lost all reason. Manus became something monstrous. His body twisted into a hulking abomination driven by rage and the desperate need to find what had been taken from him. Ulasil realized far too late what they had unleashed. Kath's deception became horribly clear in those final moments. The serpent had wanted exactly this outcome. He had manipulated an entire kingdom into awakening a being that would birth a new abyss. One traveler who witnessed the aftermath, a man called Marvelous Chester, later reflected on the tragedy. He noted that the people of Ulasil had been fooled by that toothy serpent into upturning the grave of primeval man and bringing down his terrible wrath. He wondered what they could possibly have been thinking. A new abyss began spreading beneath and through Ulasil. This was distinct from the darkness that had consumed New Londo, but it was just as catastrophic. Perhaps even worse. The uncontrolled humanity pouring out of Manus manifested as a liquid black void that seeped upward from the royal depths into the land above. Dungeons and forests alike were flooded with murky darkness. This growing emptiness became known as the Chasm of the Abyss. Strange creatures spawned from Manus's fractured soul and wandered through the corrupted lands. Humanity phantoms drifted through the abyss corridors like floating wraiths made of concentrated dark. These were not natural beings. They were fragments of humanity given form by the chaos that Manus had unleashed. But the true horror was what happened to the people of Ulasil themselves. The spreading abyss did not just threaten them physically. It corrupted them from the inside. The humanity within each citizen began going wild, just as it had within Manus. Ordinary townsfolk transformed into nightmarish creatures. The most infamous of these were called bloated heads. These were once scholars and regular citizens who had been overwhelmed by the darkness within them. Their skulls had swollen grotesquely, cracked open to reveal masses of unnerving eyeballs bulging from the wounds. The talented sorcerers of Ulasil suffered similar fates. These masters of light magic became twisted into maniacal bloathead sorcerers who wielded dark powers instead of the gentle light they had once commanded. Everything that had made Ulasil special was being inverted and corrupted by the abyss. The land itself changed under the pall of dark. Once lush forests took on an eerie gloom. Beautiful architecture crumbled into ruin as the corruption spread through every stone. Ulasil was being consumed piece by piece, citizen by citizen, until nothing recognizable would remain. What made this crisis potentially worse than New Londo was the direction of the spread. In New Londo, the abyss had grown in the underground depths of a city. It could be contained by flooding those caverns. But in Ulasil, the abyss was expanding above ground. It was threatening to devour not just a single city, but the entire surrounding region. There would be no simple way to seal this darkness away. The kingdom stood on the brink of total annihilation, and at its heart raged Manus, the father of the abyss, still searching desperately for his lost pendant while his corrupted power destroyed everything around him. Someone would need to stop this before the abyss spread beyond all hope of containment. Someone who had faced this kind of darkness before. Sometimes the hero does not save the day. Sometimes the hero becomes the very thing they swore to destroy. Deep beneath Ulasil, Manus roamed through the darkness he had created. This was no longer the primordial human who had been buried for eons. The forced resurrection had twisted him into something monstrous. His body had warped into a titanic beast that moved like an ape through the black void. He was massive beyond anything else in that realm, and he was completely, utterly mad. Manus had only one goal driving his shattered mind. He was searching for his broken pendant. The keepsake that someone had stolen during the excavation of his grave meant everything to him. So he thrashed through the abyss in a frenzy, howling for his lost treasure. His rage poured out constantly, and that rage carried his corrupted humanity with it. Everything his power touched became tainted by darkness. The spreading abyss was not some separate force. It was Manus himself, expanding outward because he could not contain what was inside him. In his madness, Manus did something that made the situation even more desperate. He reached out and abducted Princess Dusk of Ulasil. She was a gentle sorceress and the last remaining royal of the fallen kingdom. Perhaps Manus took her as a lure to draw others into his domain. Perhaps it was simply wrath, lashing out at anything connected to those who had disturbed his rest. Whatever the reason, Manus imprisoned Dusk somewhere deep in the abyss. With the princess captured and the kingdom crumbling around them, the people of Ulasil had run out of options. News of this catastrophe somehow escaped to the outside world. Maybe refugees carried warnings as they fled. Maybe some form of divine foresight alerted those who could help. What matters is that one person heard about Ulasil's plight and decided to act. Knight Artorias the Abysswalker stepped forward once again. By this point, Gwyn had long since thrown himself into the first flame and vanished from the world. There was no lord to give orders or command knights into battle. Artorias made this choice on his own. He saw what was happening to Ulasil and understood that his experience made him the only real hope they had. He had faced abyssal creatures before in New Londo. He had walked through darkness that would consume anyone else. If someone was going to stop this new abyss from spreading, it would have to be him. Artorias did not travel alone. He brought Sif with him into the shadowy ruins of Ulasil. The fact that he took his loyal wolf companion tells us something about what Artorias expected to find. He knew this would be the hardest fight of his life. He needed every advantage and every ally he could bring. But almost immediately, things went wrong. The corrupted sorcerers of Ulasil had become deranged from the darkness infecting them. When Artorias arrived in the township, these twisted mages did something that stripped him of his greatest protection. They stole his silver pendant. The very talisman that the gods had given him to deflect dark sorceries was taken right out of his possession. The sorcerers hid it behind a magically sealed illusory wall somewhere in the town. Maybe they acted out of fear. Maybe the madness controlling them simply drove them to sabotage anyone who might stop the abyss. The reason does not matter. What matters is that Artorias had just lost his primary defense against the dark magic he was about to face. A lesser knight might have turned back. Without the pendant, Artorias would be vulnerable to every abyssal spell that Manus could throw at him. But the Abysswalker did not hesitate. He pressed forward into the darkness, regardless of the danger. His mission was more important than his safety. Artorias and Sif descended into the deepest point of the corruption. This place was called the Chasm of the Abyss, and it was where Manus had made his lair. The darkness here was so thick that only the eerie glow of humanity sprites provided any light. And somewhere in that black void, the Father of the Abyss was waiting for them. The battle that followed was unlike anything Artorias had experienced before. Manus was immense, towering over the knight who had come to challenge him. The beast wielded a giant catalyst in one hand and possessed ferocious physical strength. Worse still, Manus could summon crushing dark sorceries from every direction. Without his silver pendant, Artorias had no way to deflect these magical attacks. He was fighting at a severe disadvantage from the very start. Artorias gave everything he had. He fought with all the skill and determination that had made him legendary among Gwyn's knights. But his strength was not enough. Manus was simply too powerful in his own realm. The Father of the Abyss held every advantage, and he used them all. During the clash, Manus landed a devastating blow that shattered Artorias' left arm. The injury was catastrophic. Artorias could no longer properly wield his cleansing great shield with a broken limb. His defense had been crippled along with his body. The knight who had walked through the abyss of New Londo was now broken and helpless against an enemy he could not overcome. In that moment, Artorias must have known he was finished. But even facing his own end, he thought of someone else first. With the last of his strength, Artorias threw up his great shield and invoked its magic. He created a divine barrier around young Sif, encasing his loyal companion in a protective bubble that the darkness could not penetrate. This enchanted shield would keep Sif safe from the abyss and from Manus. The wolf would survive because his master gave everything to protect him. Once the barrier was in place, Artorias had nothing left. The abyss washed over him completely. The darkness that he had kept at bay for so long finally claimed him. His soul became corrupted by the very force he had dedicated his life to fighting. What emerged from that corruption was not Knight Artorias anymore. His once gleaming azure armor was now shattered and drenched in abyssal ooze. His great sword dripped with darkness. He howled like a wild beast instead of speaking like a man. The proud knight who had earned the wolf ring from Lord Gwyn himself was gone. In his place stood a berserk warrior, driven by madness, hostile to anything that crossed his path. When others would later encounter Artorias, they would see his broken left arm hanging useless at his side. They would see the dark aura surrounding his body. They would watch him fight one-handed in a feral rage, using moves that were savage rather than skilled. Artorias had saved Sif, but he had lost himself. The Abysswalker had become one of the very monsters he had sworn to destroy. The Abysswalker was gone, but help was coming from the strangest place imaginable. Not from another kingdom, not from the remaining gods. Help was coming from the future itself. In an era far removed from Ulasil's tragedy, someone would find a peculiar item. The chosen undead, the player character of Dark Souls, would come across something called the Broken Pendant during their journey. This was no random piece of treasure. This was the other half of the pendant that Manus had been searching for in his endless rage. And Manus could sense it. Even across the boundaries of time, the Father of the Abyss felt his precious keepsake. His dark sorcery was powerful enough to do something that should have been impossible. Manus reached through the ages and grabbed hold of the chosen undead. In an instant, the protagonist was yanked backward through time and dropped directly into ancient Ulasil. The chosen undead found themselves standing in a land that was already falling apart. The corruption had spread through everything. The township was crawling with bloated heads and maddened sorcerers. The royal wood had become a twisted shadow of whatever beauty it once held. But the chosen undead pressed forward anyway, venturing deeper into this ruined kingdom that existed centuries before their own time. Their path led through the corrupted streets and dark forests until they reached the edge of the abyss itself. The chosen undead descended into that black void, following a trail that Artorias had walked before them. They did not know it yet, but they were about to fulfill a destiny that had been waiting for them since before they were born. Deep in the abyss, the chosen undead came upon a ruined Colosseum. Darkness drenched every stone of this ancient arena, and standing in the center was a figure that made everything stop. Knight Artorias was still there. What remained of the legendary Abysswalker prowled through the Colosseum like a caged animal. His armor was ruined. His movements were wrong. Everything about him had been twisted by the darkness that now controlled him. But some last fragment of instinct still drove him to attack the creatures of the abyss that wandered too close. It was the final vestige of his sanity, purely instinctual, with no real thought behind it. When the chosen undead approached, Artorias turned toward them. There was no recognition in his gaze, no trace of the noble knight who had saved Sif and journeyed to Ulasil to protect the innocent. The corruption had consumed everything that made him who he was. Artorias saw only another enemy. He attacked without hesitation. The battle that followed is considered one of the most legendary encounters in the entire Dark Souls series. Artorias fought with terrifying aggression despite his broken body. He leapt and flipped with enormous agility that seemed impossible for someone so wounded. His corrupted greatsword gouged deep trenches into the earth with every swing. He flung abyssal sludge at his opponent between strikes. Throughout the fight, Artorias would periodically stop and roar at the darkness above. When he did this, a dark aura would burst around his body as he channeled the power of the abyss. It was like a twisted mockery of the honors he had once received from Lord Gwyn. Where he had once been blessed with light and purpose, he now drew strength from the very corruption that had destroyed him. The chosen undead was fighting the ruin of a hero. There would be no reasoning with this enemy. No appeal to the knight he used to be. The real Artorias had already been lost the moment the abyss claimed his mind. What remained was just a shell driven by madness and pain. After a fierce struggle, the chosen undead triumphed. Their final blow brought Artorias down at last. The corrupted knight collapsed in the darkness of that ruined Colosseum, and his suffering finally came to an end. In that moment, Knight Artorias found the rest that had been denied to him. One could argue that putting down this rabid shell was an act of mercy. The real Artorias would never have wanted to exist as a monster attacking anything that moved. By defeating him, the chosen undead freed him from a fate worse than any defeat in battle. When Artorias fell, something remained behind. His soul manifested as an item that the chosen undead could claim. This soul of Artorias would later reveal one of the most important secrets in the entire story of Ulasil. The description of this soul reads that it belonged to Lord Gwyn's knight Artorias, who was consumed by the abyss. But the truly significant part comes next. The item reveals that the legend of Artorias repelling the abyss only told half the story. According to the soul's description, Artorias was actually defeated. His honor was preserved by some unsung hero who became the true victor over the abyss. That unsung hero was the chosen undead themselves. The world would never know what really happened in Ulasil. History would remember Artorias as the knight who stopped the abyss and saved the kingdom. Songs would be sung about his bravery. His name would inspire future generations to stand against the darkness. But the truth was that Artorias had fallen to corruption and someone else had finished his mission for him. The chosen undead would receive no credit. No statues would be built in their honor. No legends would speak their name. They had traveled back through time, defeated the corrupted Abysswalker, and set the stage for stopping the abyss entirely. And nobody would ever know. This revelation only appears if you actually read the description on the soul of Artorias. Most players might miss it entirely, but for those who pay attention, it completely reframes everything we thought we knew about the legendary knight. His public legend was incomplete. The player's actions were the missing piece that made everything else possible. There is one more scene that can occur after Artorias falls, though many players never witness it. If the chosen undead remains in the arena while carrying Artorias' soul, a visitor arrives. Lord's Blade Chiron, one of the other 4 knights who served under Gwyn, appears in the Colosseum. She has somehow tracked her dear friend to this terrible place. Perhaps she followed rumors of what happened. Perhaps something else guided her here. Chiron does not attack. She is found mourning quietly over the scene of Artorias' defeat. When she speaks to the chosen undead, she makes a simple request. She asks if they would part with the soul they carry. She explains that Artorias was a dear friend to her and that she wishes to pay proper respect. This moment shows just how much Chiron cared for the Wolf Knight. Here is one of Gwyn's deadliest assassins, a warrior who had taken countless lives in service to her lord, reduced to sorrow and gentleness at the loss of someone she loved. The player has a choice. They can give Kieran the soul, and she will thank them. In exchange, she offers her own weapons as a form of trade for keeping Artorias' remains. But if the player refuses, Sheeran becomes hostile. She will not leave without retrieving what remains of her friend. She likely intended to use the soul to honor Artorias in some way, perhaps to lay him to rest properly or to ensure his memory was preserved. This encounter is entirely optional. Many players never see it at all, but for those who do, it adds another layer of tragedy to the story of Artorias. At least one person who loved him learned what happened. At least someone came to mourn the fallen knight in that dark arena. This is also the last time Kieran appears anywhere in the games. Some believe she passed away in Ulasil, either leaving peacefully with the soul or meeting her end at the hands of a player who refused her request. Her ultimate fate remains uncertain. The chosen undead had accomplished something remarkable. They had defeated the corrupted Artorias and claimed his soul. But the job was not finished. Somewhere deeper in the abyss, Manus still raged. Princess Dusk was still his prisoner. The source of all this corruption was still spreading darkness through what remained of Ulasil. The unsung hero had one more battle ahead of them. The chosen undead had ended Artorias' suffering, but the source of all this destruction was still waiting in the deepest darkness below. With the corrupted knight finally at rest, the chosen undead pressed further into the chasm of the abyss. They were going to finish what Artorias had started. Every step took them deeper into the black void until they reached the lowest point of Ulasil's corruption. This was where the father of the abyss made his lair, but the chosen undead did not have to face this battle alone. Earlier in their journey through Ulasil, the chosen undead could have discovered young Sif. The wolf was still trapped behind the magical barrier that Artorias had created to protect him. If the player freed Sif from that protective shield, the wolf remembered this kindness, and when the time came to face Manus, Sif would repay the debt. The great wolf's spirit could be summoned to fight alongside the chosen undead in the final battle. Artorias had sacrificed everything to save Sif from the abyss. Now Sif was helping to save the hero who would complete Artorias' mission. The one whom Artorias protected was now protecting the one who would preserve his legacy. It was a full circle moment that tied everything together in the most meaningful way possible. The confrontation with Manus is considered one of the most challenging encounters in the entire Dark Souls series. The Father of the Abyss fought with relentless fury, his massive form filling the arena with chaos. Dark orbs flew through the air. Shockwaves rippled across the ground. Pursuers made of pure darkness chased the chosen undead across the battlefield. One wrong move could end everything in an instant. This fight would decide the fate of Ulasil entirely. Manus was the source of the abyss itself. As long as he existed, the darkness would keep spreading. As long as he drew breath, the corruption would continue consuming everything it touched. The only way to stop the abyss was to stop Manus. The chosen undead had one advantage that Artorias did not possess. They had not been consumed by despair. Where Artorias had fought with the weight of a failing mission on his shoulders, where he had watched his defenses stripped away and his body broken, the chosen undead came into this battle fresh. They had already overcome the corrupted Abysswalker. They had proven they could stand against the darkness. Blow after blow landed true. With Sif fighting at their side, the chosen undead pushed back against the Father of the Abyss. Manus raged and thrashed, but his attacks found fewer and fewer openings. His massive form began to falter, and then it was over. Manus collapsed. His hulking body crumpled to the ground as his dark essence began to dissipate. the creature who had been forcibly awakened by Ulasil's foolish sorcerers, who had spread corruption across an entire kingdom in his mad search for a pendant, was finally put to rest. The moment Manus fell, the abyss stopped spreading. The darkness that had been consuming Ulasil began to recede. Without its source, the corruption had no power to grow any further. The true end of the outbreak had finally arrived. But there was still one more thing to do. Princess Dusk had been held captive somewhere in the abyss, trapped within a magic barrier by Manus himself. With the father of the abyss gone, the chosen undead found her and set her free. The gentle sorceress was bewildered by everything that had happened. She had nearly lost her life to the terror that had consumed her kingdom, but she was alive. She was safe. Dusk thanked her rescuer, though something strange happened in how she remembered these events. When she spoke of her rescue later, she credited the great knight Artorias with saving her. She believed that the legendary Abysswalker had been the one who freed her from Manus and stopped the abyss from destroying Ulasil. This was not her fault. Someone had deliberately shaped her understanding of what happened. After Manus fell, the chosen undead encountered a wise mushroom sage named Elizabeth. She was one of the few beings in Ulasil who had remained sane throughout the entire catastrophe, and she had been paying very close attention to everything the chosen undead had accomplished. Elizabeth understood something crucial. She recognized that the chosen undead had come from a time far in the future. This warrior did not belong to the era of Ulasil. They had been pulled backward through the ages by Manus and had no place in this period of history. So Elizabeth made a decision that would shape how the world remembered these events forever. She told the chosen undead that she would keep their story a secret. She would remember everything they had done, but she would never tell anyone else. No one would sing praises for the true hero of Ulasil. No legends would speak their name, but their greatness would live on because Elizabeth would make it her purpose to remember. This was a conscious choice to preserve the timeline and protect history from paradoxes. If word spread that some unknown warrior from the future had actually defeated the abyss, it could create problems that nobody could predict. The simpler solution was to let people believe what made sense to them. And what made sense was that Knight Artorias, the legendary Abysswalker who had journeyed to Ulasil to stop the darkness, had succeeded in his mission. Elizabeth ensured that this would be the story everyone remembered. She likely told Dusk and anyone else who asked that Artorias had rescued the princess and stopped Manus before the abyss could spread any further. Thanks to Elizabeth's intervention, Knight Artorias was posthumously credited with everything. History would record that he had given his life to contain the abyss and save Ulasil. He would be remembered as a hero who accomplished his mission even at the cost of his own existence. The truth was buried intentionally. Years later, when Dusk meets the chosen undead in their own time period, she experiences a strange moment of recognition. Something about this warrior feels familiar to her. She senses an aura that she cannot quite place. For just an instant, she wonders if perhaps this person had something to do with her rescue long ago. But then she dismisses the thought as fanciful thinking. It could not possibly be true. Everyone knew that Artorias had saved her. The legend of the Abysswalker was now set in stone. He would be remembered as the knight who heroically gave his life to protect the world from darkness. Future generations would tell stories of his bravery. Warriors would aspire to follow his example. His name would become synonymous with standing against the abyss. And somewhere outside of time, an unsung hero carried the truth that nobody would ever believe. The chosen undead had done everything that mattered. They had freed Artorias from corruption. They had defeated the father of the abyss. They had rescued Princess Dusk. They had stopped the darkness from spreading any further. But credit would go to someone else entirely. The legend only told half the story. An unsung hero had preserved Artorias' honor by finishing what he started, and that truth was intentionally buried so that the Wolf Knight's legacy could shine untarnished through the ages. Centuries passed. Ulasil faded from memory until most people forgot it ever existed. But the name Artorias never disappeared. If anything, it only grew stronger with time. By the era of Dark Souls, Knight Artorias had become something close to a saint among warriors. The official history remembered him as the knight who repelled the abyss. He was held up as the ultimate example of bravery, a man who faced darkness itself and gave his life to protect the world from being consumed. Parents told their children stories about the Abysswalker. Knights dreamed of matching his courage. His title was spoken with reverence across Lordran. The common folk had no reason to question this narrative. They knew that the Abyss was a terrifying force that could corrupt anything it touched. They knew that someone had stopped it from spreading beyond Ulasil, and they knew that Artorias had gone into that darkness and never returned. The conclusion seemed obvious. The Wolf Knight had accomplished his mission at the ultimate cost. Only the most astute scholars might notice the hints hidden in plain sight. The soul of Artorias, if anyone bothered to read its description carefully, mentioned that he was consumed by the abyss. It stated that his supposed victory was only half true. But who pays that much attention to item descriptions? Most warriors just saw a powerful soul that could be used to forge legendary weapons. The truth embedded in the text went unnoticed by almost everyone. Numerous artifacts and locations throughout Lordran reflected the celebrated legacy of Artorias. The crest of Artorias became one of the most sought-after keys in the land. This magically sealed item guarded the door to the deepest part of Darkroot Garden. That area contained the grave site of the legendary knight himself. The very name of this crest drew adventurers from everywhere, promising access to the domain where Artorias rested. The Covenant of Artorias Ring became essential knowledge for anyone who hoped to face abyssal threats. Warriors learned that this ring was the only way to survive within the abyss itself. When the chosen undead needed to confront the four kings in the flooded ruins of New Londo, they required this very ring to enter that dark realm without being consumed. The ring reinforced the legend perfectly. Only through Artorias' covenant could anyone hope to walk where he had walked. Weapons and armor bearing his name could be forged from souls collected throughout Lordran. The great shield of Artorias carried lore praising its divine protection. The great sword of Artorias was described with reverence for its unique qualities and connection to the legendary knight. Owning equipment associated with the Abysswalker became a mark of prestige. These items elevated Artorias to near mythical status among the warriors of the realm. But there was one voice in Lordran that did not join the chorus of praise. Deep in the Darkroot Wood lived a centuries-old cat named Alvina. She was wise beyond measure and had known Artorias personally during his lifetime. Unlike everyone else in Lordran, Alvina had actually met the Wolf Knight. She had seen him as a person rather than a legend. When adventurers came seeking Artorias' grave, Alvina tried to discourage them. She called the legend of Artorias a fabrication. She described the stories of him traversing the dark as nothing more than a fairy tale. She urged those who would listen to forget this quest entirely and turn back the way they came. This skepticism stood out sharply against the universal praise Artorias received elsewhere. Why would someone who knew him personally try to diminish his legacy? Part of the answer was practical. Alvina had founded the Forest Hunters Covenant specifically to protect Artorias' tomb from those who would plunder it. She did not want treasure seekers and glory hounds disturbing her friend's final resting place. Calling the legend a fairy tale was one way to discourage people from pressing deeper into the forest. But there is another possibility. Alvina may have known the real truth about what happened in Ulasil. She may have understood that Artorias did not actually conquer the abyss, that he had fallen to corruption and been put down by someone else, that his legendary victory was credited to him after the fact by those who wanted to preserve his honor. If Alvina knew this, her attempts to steer people away from the legend take on a different meaning. She was not trying to diminish Artorias. She was trying to protect the truth from being examined too closely. The legend served its purpose. It inspired people and gave them hope, but it could not survive close scrutiny. Better to call it a fairy tale and send adventurers home than to have someone dig deep enough to uncover what really happened. Still, Alvina's skepticism was rare. The wider world never heard her guarded counsel. Most people accepted the legend of Artorias without question. He was the Abysswalker. He had faced the darkness and won. That was all anyone needed to know. The influence of Artorias extended beyond simple admiration. His methods and his story shaped how future generations approached threats from the abyss. The sealing of New Londo by flooding was often discussed alongside Artorias' efforts to contain the dark wraiths there. People understood that extreme measures were sometimes necessary when dealing with abyssal corruption. The precedent had been set. The concept that special preparation was required to enter the abyss came directly from Artorias' experience. His covenant with the abyssal creatures, which produced the ring bearing his name, became common knowledge among those who studied such threats. Anyone hoping to face the darkness would first need to obtain that ring. This was treated as basic fact rather than legend. Artorias became an icon of the fight against the dark. His story taught people that the abyss could be opposed, that standing against corruption was possible even if it cost everything, that some causes were worth sacrificing your life for. The irony was that he had ultimately failed. He had been corrupted by the very force he sought to destroy. He had been put down by a traveler from another time, but none of that mattered to his legacy. The narrative immortalized him as a martyr who struck a mighty blow against the abyss before falling. This worked because there was no one left to contradict the story. The chosen undead, who had actually defeated Manus, came from the future and returned there after the events in Ulasil. Elizabeth had deliberately kept the truth secret. Dusk believed the official version of events. Sieran had disappeared after retrieving her friend's soul. Everyone who knew what really happened either chose silence or was no longer around to speak. Artorias' honor remained intact. His heroic legacy shone through the ages without a single blemish visible to the public eye. And that legacy would continue to shape events long after his passing. The story of the Abysswalker would inspire entire organizations dedicated to fighting the darkness. Future warriors would take up his cause and carry his memory into new eras. The legend that was built on half-truths would become the foundation for something much larger. Artorias had failed his mission in Ulasil, but in a strange way, his failure accomplished more than success ever could have. A living knight eventually grows old and fades away. A martyred legend lives forever. When the abyss finally receded from Ulasil, one figure emerged from the darkness, carrying more than just his own survival. Sif had lived through the nightmare that claimed his master, and he would spend the rest of his existence making sure that sacrifice meant something. The young wolf had been trapped behind that magical barrier for what must have felt like an eternity. Cowering in the protective aura that Artorias had created with his final strength, Sif had waited in the darkness while chaos raged around him. The chosen undead had found him there during their journey through the abyss. They had freed him from behind the fallen great shield and when the time came to face Manus, Sif had fought alongside his rescuer to bring down the Father of the Abyss. After Manus fell and the darkness stopped spreading, Sif was finally able to escape that terrible place. The lore confirms that Sif survived the battle with Manus, thanks to the intervention of the chosen undead. But survival was only the beginning of a much longer story. Sif did not leave the abyss empty-handed. The wolf carried with him the last physical remnants of his fallen master. Artorias' divine greatsword came into Sif's possession. So did the Covenant of Artorias ring, the mystical band that allowed its wearer to traverse the abyss without being consumed. Whether Artorias had intentionally given these items to Sif before his corruption, or whether the wolf claimed them after his master fell, the result was the same. Sif now held the most important artifacts associated with the legendary Abysswalker. The young wolf made his way back to the surface world. Behind him, Ulasil continued its slow collapse. The kingdom that had been destroyed by its own foolishness would not recover. Over the generations that followed, the ruins of Ulasil sank deeper into the earth. Forests grew over the broken stones. Geography itself shifted and changed until the land was unrecognizable. What had once been the kingdom of Ulasil eventually became known as the Darkroot Garden. This dense forest, filled with ancient trees and crumbling architecture, was all that remained of the place where Artorias had met his end. Most people who wandered through Darkroot had no idea they were walking over the bones of a lost civilization. The connection between Ulasil and Darkroot was forgotten by almost everyone. At some point during this transformation, Artorias was given a proper burial. His body was interred in a tranquil grave within the forest that had grown over his final battlefield. The exact circumstances of this burial remain unclear. Perhaps Kieran had something to do with it after she retrieved his soul from the chosen undead. Perhaps Alvina, who had known Artorias during his lifetime, arranged for her friend to be laid to rest properly. What we know for certain is that a tombstone was placed in a serene clearing deep within Darkroot. Ancient stone knights stood guard around the perimeter. Flora grew thick and peaceful around the site. This is where Sif chose to spend the rest of his days. The wolf settled at the graveside of his fallen master and became its eternal guardian. He did not wander off to find a new life. He did not seek out other companions or adventures. Sif had one purpose now, and he devoted himself to it completely. He would protect the grave of Knight Artorias until the end of time. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. Through all of it, Sif remained at his post. The wolf changed during this endless vigil. The young pup, who had cowered behind a magical shield in the abyss, grew into something far more formidable. Sif became enormous over the passing years, eventually earning the title Great Grey Wolf Sif. His body swelled with size and power until he towered over any normal creature. His fur turned grey with age, but his strength never diminished, and he still carried his master's greatsword. Sif had learned to fight using a blade by watching Artorias during their time together. Now he put those lessons to use in defense of the grave. The wolf gripped the massive greatsword in his jaws and wielded it with surprising grace. He could swing that enormous blade in sweeping arcs that would cleave through armor and bone. He could spin and slash in patterns that echoed the techniques Artorias himself had used in battle. The student had become a master in his own right. Word spread across Lordran about what waited in Darkroot Garden. Treasure seekers heard rumors of powerful artifacts associated with the legendary Abysswalker. The Covenant of Artorias ring in particular drew attention from those who hoped to face abyssal threats. Everyone knew that ring was necessary to survive within the abyss. and everyone knew it was somewhere in that forest, guarded by Artorias' grave. Many warriors ventured into Darkroot, seeking glory and treasure. They pushed through the thick woods and fought past the stone guardians. They searched for the clearing where the legendary knight was buried. None of them who found Sif left unscathed. The great wolf showed no mercy to those who approached his master's resting place. It did not matter why they had come. It did not matter if they claimed noble intentions. Sif attacked anyone who drew too close to the grave. His ferocity was unmatched by anything else in the forest. Warriors who had conquered countless challenges met their end beneath the sweeping blade of a wolf who refused to let anyone disturb the knight he loved. Locals in Lordran eventually learned to avoid that part of Darkroot Garden entirely. Stories circulated about the giant wolf who guarded Artorias' tomb. Parents warned their children. Veterans cautioned younger adventurers. The message was clear. If you wanted to obtain the covenant of Artorias Ring, you would have to defeat its guardian first. And defeating Sif was something very few warriors could accomplish. Sif did not carry out this duty entirely alone. Alvina had been friends with both Artorias and Sif during happier times. The ancient cat took measures to help protect the grave as well. She founded an organization called the Forest Hunters Covenant. This group recruited undying hunters and tasked them with prowling the woods around Darkroot. Their job was simple: find anyone who did not belong in the forest and drive them out by force. Under Alvina's guidance, the Forest Hunters became a supplementary line of defense. They would invade the worlds of trespassers and attack without warning. Anyone trying to reach Artorias' grave would have to deal with these hunters before they ever got close to Sif. It was a layered protection system designed to keep the tombs safe from all threats. Alvina herself served as the first obstacle for many adventurers. When the player encounters her in the game, she tries to use words before violence. She discourages people from pursuing the grave. She calls the whole legend of Artorias a fairy tale and suggests that seekers should simply turn around and forget about whatever they hope to find. If her warnings worked, then no conflict was necessary. But if adventurers ignored her counsel and pressed deeper into the forest anyway, then the forest hunters and eventually Sif would deal with them. For untold years, this system worked. Sif upheld his master's legacy in the only way he knew how. He made certain that the grave remained undisturbed. He ensured that the covenant of Artorias Ring did not fall into unworthy hands. Every day was the same. Guard the tomb, drive off intruders, wait for the next challenger, repeat forever. Think about what kind of existence this was for Sif. The wolf had lost the person he cared about most in the world. He had watched Artorias sacrifice everything to protect him. And now Sif had dedicated his entire being to protecting a stone marker over a buried body. He had no other purpose, no other joy, no other companion who understood what he had been through. Centuries of standing vigil over a grave, centuries of fighting off treasure hunters and glory seekers, centuries of remembering a master who would never return. It was tragic, but it was also noble in a way that few things in Dark Souls managed to be. Sif could have walked away at any point. He could have found a new life somewhere far from the memories of Ulasil. Instead, he chose loyalty. He chose to honor the knight who had given everything to save him. He chose to make his master's sacrifice mean something by ensuring that Artorias' legacy remained protected. The image of a giant wolf standing over a grave with a great sword clenched in his jaws became one of the most iconic scenes in the entire Dark Souls series. It represents everything that made the bond between Artorias and Sif special. Undying loyalty, lingering love that persisted long after one of them was gone, a friendship that transcended even the corruption of the abyss itself. Artorias had saved Sif in the darkness beneath Ulasil. Now Sif was spending eternity returning that favor in the only way he could, by making sure that no one ever forgot the Wolf Knight, by standing guard over his memory until the stars themselves burned out. But eventually, someone would come who could not be turned away, someone who needed the covenant of Artorias ring for their own journey into darkness. And when that day arrived, Sif would face the hardest battle of his long existence. After centuries of standing guard, the day finally came when Sif would face someone he could not turn away. And the cruelest part was that he already knew this person. He had known them for a very long time. The chosen undead was on a journey that required them to collect Lord souls from across Lordran. One of those souls belonged to the four kings, the corrupted rulers who still lingered in the abyss beneath the flooded ruins of New Londo. To reach those kings, the chosen undead would need to enter the abyss directly. And to enter the abyss without being consumed, they needed the covenant of Artorias ring. Tales and rumors pointed toward Darkroot Garden. Everyone in Lordran knew that the legendary Abysswalker had been buried somewhere in that forest. Everyone knew that his ring rested with him, and everyone knew that a massive wolf guarded the grave against all who approached. The chosen undead made their way through the dense woods. They pushed past the stone guardians and the prowling forest hunters. They ignored whatever warnings Alvina might have offered. Their mission required that ring, and nothing would stop them from obtaining it. Eventually, they reached the serene clearing where Artorias had been laid to rest. The tombstone stood quiet among the ancient trees. Flowers grew peacefully around the site. It would have been beautiful if not for what waited there. Great grey wolf Sif stood between the chosen undead and the grave. The massive wolf turned to face the intruder. His grey fur bristled, his muscles tensed. He was ready to do what he had done countless times before, ready to drive off another treasure seeker who dared approach his master's resting place. But then something unexpected happened. If the chosen undead had travelled back in time to Ulasil and freed Sif from behind that magical barrier in the abyss, a unique moment occurs here that changes everything. Sif pauses before attacking. He sniffs the air. Something about this intruder is familiar. Something he has not sensed in a very long time. Recognition dawns in the wolf's eyes. This is the same person who saved him. Centuries ago, from Sif's perspective, this human had found him cowering behind Artorias' great shield in the depths of the abyss. This human had freed him from that protective prison. This human had fought alongside him against the father of the abyss itself. Sif's ears droop. A mournful whine escapes his throat. The fierce guardian who had torn apart countless warriors suddenly looks hesitant, reluctant, sad in a way that animals are not supposed to be capable of expressing. The giant wolf remembers his savior, and his savior has come to take the ring. But duty outweighs everything else for Sif. He has spent centuries protecting this grave. He made a promise to himself when he first settled here. No one would disturb his master's resting place. No one would take the artifacts that Artorias left behind. Not even the person who once saved his life. With mournful resolve, Sif takes Artorias' greatsword in his jaws. He prepares to fight the one friend he has left in the world. If the player did not free Sif during the Ulasil section of the game, this recognition moment does not happen. Instead, Sif simply leaps into battle without hesitation. He sees another intruder and responds the way he always has. But for those who did save Sif in the past, this scene becomes one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the entire series. The duel that follows is both majestic and heartbreaking. Sif fights with techniques that echo his fallen master. The massive wolf swings his greatsword in swift spins and crushing strikes that mirror the moveset Artorias himself once used. Every attack carries the weight of lessons learned during happier times. Sif had watched Artorias train and fight during their adventures together. He had absorbed those techniques and made them his own. Now he was using his master's swordsmanship to protect his master's grave. Throughout the battle, Sif growls and howls with fierce determination. He is not fighting to survive. He is fighting to fulfill the purpose he chose for himself centuries ago. Every swing of that great sword is an act of loyalty to the knight who gave everything to save him. The chosen undead presses their advantage. They have overcome corrupted knights and abyssal horrors. They have traveled through time and defeated the father of the abyss. Sif is a formidable opponent, but the chosen undead has faced worse. As the fight wears on, something terrible happens. Sif takes too much damage. His movements begin to slow. His once powerful strikes become sluggish and weak, and then he starts to limp. This moment is infamous among Dark Souls players for good reason. The mighty wolf who has been swinging that great sword with such ferocity suddenly can barely lift the blade. His legs shake with every step. He stumbles and struggles to stay upright. But he does not stop fighting. Even in agony, Sif refuses to give up. He keeps trying to raise the sword. He keeps trying to defend the grave. The wolf who could have walked away at any point in the last several centuries will not walk away now. Not even when his body is failing him. Not even when every movement causes him pain. This is the loyalty and tenacity that Artorias taught him. Never surrender. Never abandon your duty. Keep fighting until you physically cannot fight anymore. The chosen undead delivers the final blow. Sif collapses. The greatsword falls from his jaws and clatters against the ground. With one last echoing howl toward the sky, the great grey wolf breathes his last breath. He falls upon the grave of Artorias, coming to rest at the feet of the tombstone he protected for so many years. The covenant of Artorias' ring now lies ready to be claimed. The chosen undead takes the ring from the clearing. They now possess everything they need to enter the abyss of New Londo and confront the four kings. They leave the grave behind them, walking out of the forest with an artifact that cost the life of its guardian. What remains in that clearing is a scene of quiet tragedy. The tombstone still stands. The flowers still grow. But the wolf who made this place his purpose is gone. For the first time in centuries, the grave of Knight Artorias has no one to protect it. One imagines that Alvina mourned when she learned what happened. The forest hunters had lost the cornerstone of their entire purpose. The greatest defender of Artorias' legacy had fallen to someone who needed what he guarded. There would be no replacing Sif. There would be no finding another wolf with that kind of loyalty and strength. But in the larger scheme of things, something meaningful came from this tragedy. By yielding the covenant of Artorias' ring through his defeat, Sif ensured that the chosen undead could continue the mission that Artorias himself had once failed. The ring would allow them to traverse the abyss of New Londo. It would allow them to reach the four kings who had lingered in that darkness since the city was flooded. It would allow them to destroy those corrupted rulers once and for all. There is a poetic symmetry in this outcome. Artorias had given everything to save Sif and stop the abyss. He had sacrificed his own mind and body to protect the wolf he loved. Now Sif had given everything to enable someone else to finish what Artorias started. All of the Abysswalker's bequeathments had now passed to the chosen undead. The ring came from Sif's defeat. The great sword and shield had been obtained during the journey through Ulasil. The soul had been claimed after putting down Artorias' corrupted form. The player now carried every piece of the legendary knight's legacy with them. When the chosen undead uses that ring to enter the abyss beneath New Londo, they are symbolically carrying Artorias' will forward. When they destroy the Four Kings and finally quell the darkness that Artorias could not overcome centuries ago, they are completing the mission he died trying to accomplish. In that sense, both Artorias and Sif are vindicated by what happens next. The Abysswalker had been sent to stop the Four Kings during the original New Londo crisis. He had fought through hordes of dark wraiths, but could not destroy the kings themselves. The city had to be flooded just to contain the threat. That failure had weighed on Artorias during his lifetime. Now, through the ring he had obtained and the defeat of his loyal companion, that failure was being corrected. The abyss of New Londo would finally be dealt with properly. The Four Kings would finally be destroyed. The darkness that had festered beneath the flooded city for so long would finally be extinguished. Artorias' legacy had directly contributed to this outcome. Without his covenant with the abyssal creatures, the ring would not exist. Without the ring, no one could enter the abyss to fight the kings. Every piece of his story, from his original mission to his fall in Ulasil, to Sif's centuries of guardianship, had led to this moment. The circle that began with Artorias was now closed. But the personal tragedy of what happened in that clearing cannot be overlooked. A noble wolf fell by the hand of a hero in service to a master who had been gone for centuries. Sif did not have to spend his life guarding that grave. He chose to because loyalty meant more to him than anything else. And in the end, that loyalty cost him everything. This is one of the central themes of Dark Souls. Duty comes at a price. Honor demands sacrifice. The world does not reward good intentions with happy endings. Sif did everything right. He protected his master's legacy with unwavering dedication. And his reward was to be struck down by the one person in the world who might have been his friend. The grave of Artorias stands empty now. No wolf guards its perimeter. No great sword gleams in the moonlight. Just a tombstone in a forest that used to be a kingdom, marking the resting place of a knight whose legend was built on half-truths and whose guardian gave everything to keep that legend alive. Kingdoms rise and fall. Names are forgotten. Entire civilizations crumble into dust and are replaced by new ones that know nothing of what came before. But some stories are too powerful to disappear completely. They find ways to survive even when everything else is lost. The events of Dark Souls took place in Lordran during a specific cycle of the Age of Fire. But time in this world moves in strange patterns. The fire fades and is rekindled. Lands shift and change. New kingdoms rise on the bones of old ones. By the era of Dark Souls 2, the world has transformed so completely that Lordran itself is barely a memory. The new land is called Dranglek, and it has its own history filled with kings and curses and struggles against the dark. Artorias is not directly mentioned in the lore of Dranglek. The people there have their own heroes and their own legends. They face their own versions of the abyss without knowing the name of the knight who first walked into that darkness centuries ago. But for players who pay close attention, subtle echoes of the Abysswalker can still be found. The most obvious connection appears in the crown of the Old Iron King expansion. Deep within a place called Broom Tower, adventurers can discover a weapon that looks remarkably familiar. The majestic greatsword bears an uncanny resemblance to the blade that Artorias once wielded. Its shape and design mirror the weapon that Sif guarded for centuries, but the similarities go far deeper than appearance. When a player wields the majestic greatsword in their left hand, something remarkable happens. The weapon grants access to special attacks that include flips and spins, nearly identical to the techniques Artorias used in battle. The same acrobatic swordsmanship that made the Abysswalker legendary can be performed by anyone holding this blade in the correct hand. The item description provides a cryptic explanation for this connection. It describes the weapon as an ancient greatsword of unknown origin that was passed down through generations of warriors. The blade eventually reached a wandering knight of Ferossa named Gwyn and was lost upon his passing. But the most telling detail comes at the end. The description notes that every single prominent swordsman who inherited this weapon throughout history was left-handed. This is a direct reference to Artorias himself. During the battle with Manos in Ulasil, Artorias suffered a devastating injury that shattered his left arm. From that point forward, he could only fight using his right arm to swing his greatsword. But the techniques he developed, the flips and spins and acrobatic strikes, were designed for a left-handed fighter. When we encounter Artorias as a boss in the first game, he fights one-handed because his dominant arm was destroyed. The majestic greatsword's requirement to be wielded left-handed makes perfect sense in this context. The weapon was designed for or associated with a left-handed swordsman. The special techniques it grants are the same ones that swordsmen used. Everything about the blade points toward Artorias as its original owner or inspiration. If players go even further and use a technique called power stancing with the majestic greatsword, they can perform Artorias' signature somersault attack. This iconic move where the wielder flips through the air before bringing the blade crashing down was one of the Abysswalker's most recognizable techniques. Seeing it available through this weapon in Dark Souls 2 confirms the connection beyond any reasonable doubt. Through the majestic greatsword, Artorias' fighting spirit lives on in Drangleic. The people of this later age may not remember his name. They may not know the story of the Wolf Knight who walked into the abyss and was corrupted by its power. But his techniques survived. His weapon, or something, descended from it, made its way through countless hands across the centuries, until it ended up in Broom Tower, waiting to be discovered. The path this sword traveled speaks to how legends persist even when their origins are forgotten. Tales of a cursed greatsword with incredible power against abyssal creatures must have been passed down through generations. Warriors sought it out, hoping to gain that power for themselves. Each one added to its history before passing it on to the next. By the time the blade reached Drangleic, no one remembered where it came from or who first wielded it. But the sword itself remembered. Its techniques remained intact across all those years. Dark Souls 2 features its own struggles with the abyss that echo what happened in Lordran. The darkness did not disappear just because a new age dawned. It continued to threaten the world in new forms and new locations. The dark chasm of old represents one manifestation of this ongoing threat. This place is accessible through the Pilgrims of Dark Covenant, which is led by a character named Dark Diver Grandol. This ancient man seeks a champion, willing to brave the dark chasms and face what lurks within them. The parallels to Artorias are obvious, even if his name is never spoken. Grandal is essentially looking for someone to do what the Abysswalker once did, to enter the darkness and fight against it. The difference is that in Dark Souls 2, the player does not need a special ring to traverse these abyssal spaces. The rules have changed somewhat between games, but the concept remains the same. The abyss is dangerous. It corrupts everything it touches. Someone must be brave enough to go inside and confront what waits there. Perhaps the most striking parallel to Artorias in Dark Souls 2 involves a knight named Raim. This warrior was one of the greatest knights in all of Drangleic. He served the king with distinction and was considered among the finest swordsmen in the realm. According to the scholar of the first Sin edition of the game, Raim wielded the majestic greatsword for a time before eventually discarding it. Think about what this means. Raim, a renowned knight facing threats from darkness, used the very weapon associated with Artorias. He was following in the footsteps of the Abysswalker without necessarily knowing whose path he walked. And just like Artorias, Raim fell. The knight eventually succumbed to a corrupting influence and transformed into the Fume Knight, one of the most challenging bosses in the entire Dark Souls series. While Raim was consumed by a different kind of dark power than what claimed Artorias, the pattern is unmistakable. A great knight takes up arms against corruption. That knight is eventually overwhelmed and transformed into a monster. The hero becomes the very thing they sought to destroy. The themes of Artorias' story repeat themselves across the ages. Knights will always rise to face the darkness. Some will succeed, and some will fall. Those who fall will often become corrupted versions of what they once were. This cycle continued long after the Abysswalker was gone, playing out again and again with different names and different kingdoms, but the same tragic arc. Even without explicit references to Artorias in the lore of Drangleic, his influence permeates the world of Dark Souls 2. The idea of an abyss-fighting knight had seeped into the collective memory of civilization. Warriors sought out weapons associated with that legend. Organizations formed to send champions into the darkness. Knights who confronted corruption found themselves walking the same path that Artorias had walked centuries before. The Abysswalker may have been forgotten by name, but the impact of his story never truly faded. It shaped how future generations understood the fight against the dark. It inspired warriors who had never heard of Lordran or Ulasil or the Wolf Knight. It survived through a greatsword passed from hand to hand across countless years. Some legends are simply too powerful to disappear completely. Artorias was one of them. Many eons passed after the events in Lordran. The Age of Fire continued its endless cycle of fading and rekindling. The land itself transformed beyond recognition. By the time of Dark Souls 3, the world had changed so dramatically that even the name Lordran was forgotten by most. The realm was now called Lothric, and new kingdoms had risen on foundations that no one remembered building. The name Artorias had faded into obscurity during all those centuries. Common people did not speak of the Wolf Knight or the Abysswalker. They did not know the story of the knight who had walked into darkness to save Ulasil. They did not remember Sif or Kieran or any of the four knights who once served Lord Gwyn. But the spirit of Artorias endured in a new form. His legacy had not disappeared. It had transformed into something even larger than one knight could ever have been alone. The Abyss Watchers emerged as one of the most prominent organizations in the world of Dark Souls 3. These warriors were the leaders of an order called Farron's Undead Legion. Every member of this legion had taken an oath to fight the Abyss wherever it appeared across the world. They dedicated their entire existence to opposing the darkness that threatened to consume everything. The Abyss Watchers did not necessarily know the name Artorias, but they worshipped his ideals completely. They revered the concept of the Wolf Knight, whom they regarded as the first person to ever stand against the Abyss. They sought to emulate him in everything they did. Their entire organization was built around continuing the mission he had started so long ago. Item descriptions in Dark Souls 3 make this connection explicit. The lore states directly that the Wolf Knight was the first Abyss Watcher. This means Artorias is considered the progenitor of everything the Watchers represent. He is their patron saint, their founding inspiration, the template upon which their entire order was constructed. The Abyss Watchers swore upon the blood of the wolf. Their souls became bound together through this pact that traced its roots all the way back to Artorias himself. This was more than just symbolic loyalty. The Watchers enacted an actual ritual to inherit the will of the Wolf Knight. They partook in something called wolf's blood. This mystical substance bound all of their souls together as one. By drinking this blood, every Watcher became linked to every other Watcher. They shared a single collective soul between all of them. This is represented in the game by the soul of the blood of the wolf, which you obtain after defeating them as a boss. The entire legion possessed one shared soul, rather than individual souls for each member. The Covenant of Wolf's Blood granted each Watcher a portion of Artorias' essence. This made them spiritual successors to the Abysswalker in the most literal sense possible. They carried a piece of him within themselves. They inherited his duty to halt the abyss. They became living extensions of his will, centuries after his physical form had crumbled to dust. The Watchers even adopted a fighting style designed to mimic the techniques Artorias had used. They wielded oversized greatswords paired with small curved daggers. In battle, they used wild spinning attacks and leaping strikes that would have looked familiar to anyone who had ever faced the corrupted knight in Ulasil. This unusual combination of a massive sword and a smaller secondary weapon directly mirrors how Artorias fought. He would flip and thrust his blade with one hand while using the other for balance or parrying. The Watchers used their daggers for parrying and acrobatic movements in the same way. The visual design of the Abyss Watchers pays homage to Artorias as well. Their armor, known as the Undead Legion set, consists of tattered cloaks and battered plate, reminiscent of the garb Artorias wore. The azure color may be faded, and the materials may be different, but the inspiration is unmistakable. The lore even notes subtly that the Wolf Knight's identity was lost to the legends. People remembered what he represented without remembering who he actually was. The location where the Abyss Watchers established their headquarters carries tremendous significance. Farron Keep sits in a region that has transformed dramatically over the ages. But this land was not chosen randomly. Farron Keep occupies the same territory as ancient Ulasil and what later became Darkroot Garden. The Watchers built their base on the very ground where Artorias fell and where Manas's abyss had first erupted. They did this deliberately. Beneath Farron Keep lies the sealed chasm of the abyss. The remnants of the darkness that Manas unleashed still linger deep below the surface. The corruption was contained but never truly destroyed. The Abyss Watchers took it upon themselves to monitor this primordial threat and ensure it never spread again. They vowed to guard the sealed darkness and watch for any signs of abyssal corruption anywhere in the world. The Watchers developed a reputation for extreme measures when dealing with potential abyss outbreaks. If they even suspected the presence of abyssal corruption in a land, they would not investigate cautiously or try diplomatic solutions. They would declare a crusade and raze the entire kingdom to the ground without hesitation. Total destruction was their preferred method of containment. A character named Hawkwood describes them in Dark Souls 3. He explains that the Undead Legion of Farron is a caravan of undead warriors sworn by wolf's blood to contain the abyss. He warns that the Legion will bury a kingdom at the first sign of exposure to the darkness. This ruthless strategy echoes what happened to New Londo during Artorias' era. The authorities back then had flooded an entire city and drowned countless innocent people just to stop the abyss from spreading. The Abyss Watchers continued this tradition of extreme sacrifice. They willingly committed terrible acts for what they believed was the greater good. In their minds, this was exactly what Artorias would have wanted. No price was too great if it meant stopping the abyss. The influence of the Abyss Watchers grew so significant that they eventually took on one of the most important roles in the entire world. When the time came to rekindle the first flame, and extend the age of fire, the entire legion sacrificed themselves together. They linked the fire as a collective, becoming a single Lord of Cinder shared across all of their bound souls. This act demonstrated just how much the world respected and relied upon the Watchers. Lords of Cinder were the greatest heroes of their ages. They were the ones powerful and selfless enough to burn themselves as fuel for the flame. The fact that the Abyss Watchers earned this status proves they were seen as noble protectors despite their severe methods. But the cycle of fire is never simple. When Prince Lothric refused to link the fire during a later age, the bells tolled to resurrect previous Lords of Cinder. The Abyss Watchers rose from their graves along with other past heroes. They were summoned to serve again and help rekindle the flame that was threatening to fade. The Watchers refused. Instead of returning to their thrones and preparing to burn once more, they abandoned their duties as Lords of Cinder. They returned to Farron Keep to continue their eternal watch against the Abyss. In their minds, guarding against the darkness was more important than keeping the fire burning. They chose their original mission over the fate of the entire world. This is where the tragedy of the Abyss Watchers reaches its cruelest point. These devoted followers of Artorias could not escape the same fate that had claimed him. By the time the player arrives in Dark Souls 3 as the Ashen One, the Abyss Watchers have begun succumbing to the very corruption they swore to destroy. One by one, members of the Legion started showing signs of abyssal taint. Perhaps it came from their endless battles against creatures of darkness. Perhaps the lingering abyss beneath Farron Keep seeped into them over the centuries. Perhaps the wolf's blood that bound them together became a conduit for corruption to spread through the entire order. Whatever the cause, the results were horrifying. The uncorrupted Watchers responded to this internal threat the only way they knew how. They turned their swords against their own brethren. As soon as any Watcher showed signs of abyss corruption, the others would strike them down immediately. This was their protocol for containing the darkness. The same merciless efficiency they had used against kingdoms was now being used against each other. The Abyss Watchers descended into civil war. The opening cutscene of Dark Souls 3 shows them locked in endless combat within their keep. They fight and fall and rise again, only to continue fighting. Watchers who were once brothers in arms now slash at each other without hesitation. The corruption and the attempts to contain it have become indistinguishable from each other. This situation mirrors what happened to Artorias in a painfully poetic way. The organization founded to fight the Abyss was being consumed by it from within. The spiritual successors to the Wolf Knight were suffering the same fate he had suffered. The legacy that was supposed to prevent another tragedy like Ulasil had become a tragedy itself. When the Ashen One enters Farron Keep, they find the Watchers in this state of perpetual conflict. Only a handful remain capable of fighting. They are all hostile because the curse has touched every one of them. There is no negotiating with what remains of this once noble order. The boss battle against the Abyss Watchers represents the last gasp of Artorias' legacy. Multiple Watchers engage the player simultaneously, some fighting each other, while others focus on the intruder. The chaos of their civil war spills over into the combat itself. Corrupted Watchers rise to attack their uncorrupted allies. Uncorrupted Watchers sometimes accidentally help the player by targeting their fallen brothers instead. When the first phase ends, something remarkable happens. The remaining Watchers combine their power through the wolf's blood that binds them. They resurrect collectively into a single possessed champion wielding a flaming greatsword. This final form exhibits moves that would be instantly recognizable to anyone who had faced Artorias. The flips, the spins, the acrobatic strikes, all of it enhanced by fire rather than darkness, but still unmistakably derived from the techniques of the Wolf Knight. Even the combined might of the Abyss Watchers cannot overcome the Ashen One. The player defeats this final champion and puts the Legion to rest at last. With their defeat, the Ashen One obtains the soul of the blood of the wolf. This item represents the shared soul of all the Abyss Watchers. It traces its lineage directly back to Artorias through the wolf's blood covenant that bound the Legion together. Players can transpose this soul into the Wolf Knight's greatsword, a weapon whose description explicitly connects it to the legacy of the Abysswalker. The item description notes that the Wolf Knight was the first Abyss Watcher and that his sword is highly effective against creations of the Abyss. Even in Dark Souls 3, countless years after Artorias walked the earth, weapons bearing his legacy still possess special power against the darkness he devoted his life to fighting. In defeating the Abyss Watchers, the player essentially closes the chapter on everything Artorias inspired. The order he founded through his example is gone. The warriors who carried his will forward have been put to rest. The legacy that burned so brightly for so many centuries has finally been extinguished. But has it really? Every time a warrior in the Dark Souls universe dons armor inspired by the Wolf Knight, Artorias' memory flickers back to life. Every time someone takes up a greatsword to strike down a dark wraith or a creature of the abyss, they are continuing what he started. Every time a hero stands against the darkness regardless of the personal cost, they are walking the same path he walked. Knight Artorias the Abysswalker achieved in passing what he sought during his lifetime. He became an enduring beacon of resistance against the abyss. His personal story is one of heroism and corruption and sacrifice. It represents the endless struggle between light and dark that defines the entire Dark Souls universe. He fell to the very force he fought against. He was put down by an unknown hero from the future. His legend was built on half-truths and preserved by those who chose to bury the full story. But the ripples he caused in history saved kingdoms and inspired generations of warriors to take up arms against the darkness. From his rise as one of Gwyn's most trusted knights, through his covenant with abyssal creatures, to his tragic fall in Ulasil, to the centuries of guardianship by his loyal wolf, to the order that carried his will forward across the ages, the story of Knight Artorias stands as one of the most celebrated and sorrowful legends in all of Dark Souls lore. The Abysswalker walked into darkness so that others might live in light. And even when that darkness claimed him, his sacrifice was not in vain. The Wolf Knight was the first to stand against the abyss. He would not be the last. And as long as the darkness threatens to consume the world, there will always be those who remember what Artorias taught them. Some enemies cannot be defeated with strength alone. Some battles cannot be won without paying the ultimate price. But even in defeat, even in corruption, even in the loss of everything you once were, honor can still be preserved. Legacy can still endure, and the fight can still continue through those who come after.